So I came across some information lately that kind of challenged my belief on foot placement when we're running. And so I thought I'd not only discuss that, but also cover some other misconceptions you may have, and certainly I have had, about running. Welcome to the Ageless Runner. I'm Ralph. Before I get into this foot placement surprise for me, let me first talk about my biggest pet peeve, or my biggest frustration with misconceptions about running, and that is running will ruin your knees. This kind of comes from the notion that all the repetitive motion, all the repetitive impact will give rise to osteoarthritis. This is where the cartilage or the cushion in your knee will degrade over time, eventually leading to bone on bone in your knees or your hips and cause a lot of pain. But the research just doesn't support that notion. There's a 2017 meta-analysis where they looked at runners and non-runners. These are recreational runners like you and me. And they found that for sedentary people, over 10% of them developed either hip or knee osteoarthritis. But in the runners, it was around 3%, a little over 3%, almost a 3-to-1 difference. So you're not going to ruin your knees running. Now, that's a little different for elite runners. These people that, start running young and run lots of miles, they're a little higher risk for osteoarthritis, but recreational runners are not. In fact, it's better for your knees than not running at all. Now, I'm not saying you'll never have a knee issue, because you could hurt your knee, you could step wrong, or maybe have bad form, or maybe you got a weakness in your body. For example, I've had knee pain in the front of my knee, patellar tendonitis. And once I got to the gym and started exercising, doing leg extensions, it eventually went away. So you may have knee injuries for some reason, but you're not going to ruin your knees because of continued running. So misconception number 2, or maybe a new misconception, at least for me, is that heel striking is bad. I've always believed heel striking is bad. And you can look at a lot of my videos and you will hear me say heel striking is bad. I came across a study done in 2010 where some researchers decided to film some marathon runners and look at their foot placement. And they filmed them at mile 6 and a mile 20. They found that mile 6, 88% of the runners were heel striking. And at mile 20, 93% of the runners were heel striking. So this was obviously their natural form. It's where they felt they ran most efficient. So the conclusion of the author in the article is that not all heel striking is bad. And maybe heel striking got a bad name because of overstriding. Overstriding is probably the more likely culprit of injuries, not heel striking. And that when we extend our leg, when our leg gets straighter, we're approaching locking our knee, that's when injuries can happen. But if you keep your foot landing closer to your body, even though you heel strike, that may be okay, at least according to this research. So not all heel striking is created equal, in other words. So, of course, the way to keep your foot placement closer to your body is by increasing your cadence, which leads to misconception number 3, and that is 180 steps per minute is the ideal cadence. Now, this misconception comes from the 1984 study done by the running coach Jack Daniels looking at runners in the Olympics. And he found that these elite athletes were running at 180 steps per minute or more, and that was the key part there, the or more. Some of them were averaging over 190. And we tend to forget about this 180 number, as this was developed looking at Olympic athletes running at Olympic paces. That's not you and me. We're recreational runners running at a much slower pace, not running nearly as hard. So we probably don't really need to run at 180 steps per minute. In fact, if you're running at a 10-minute per mile or slower pace, in the 160s tends to be very adequate for most runners. So don't feel like you need to shoot for that 180. I have found my natural cadence when I look at my data is around 170. And if I try to do 180 using my metronome, it feels very uncomfortable. It's like I'm working too hard. So find your natural cadence, maybe shoot for something over 160, but don't feel like 180 is the magic number, because it's not. Now, misconception number 4 is one that I believed in my early days of running, and that is real runners don't walk. I remember communicating with a work colleague I had in Costa Rica, and Tanya was an athlete. She was running triathlons, biking and running and swimming. I remember emailing her once and talking about running, saying, you know what, I can't run real far before I need to take a walk break. I feel bad taking these walk breaks. She emailed back and says, well, Ralph, all runners walk. Says, I walk when I do my races and my marathons. So that made me feel a lot better. And of course, years later, I discovered One Rock Run, and that was the end of that feeling. And you shouldn't feel that way either. It's really important to take those walk breaks. Now, there's an interesting study done in 2014 where they took marathon runners, broke them into 2 groups. One group did run-walk. One group did run-run. And when they looked at the median difference in their time, it was very small. The run-run group finished in roughly 4 hours and 7 minutes, and the run-walk group finished in roughly 4 hours and 14 minutes. That 7-minute difference is less than 3%. It's hardly nothing. And the run group had more fatigue and more muscle soreness. So do not feel bad about walking. You should absolutely be taking walk breaks. It's important for your health and not hurting yourself, and you'll feel better when you're all done. Hey, hope you're enjoying this video about misconceptions. If you are, please scroll down and hit that like icon and subscribe at the same time. Thank you so much. Now, misconception number 5 is something that I've said in the past in my videos, is do not increase your weekly mileage by more than 10%. I've always been a little suspicious of that rule of thumb because there are times I felt I could easily do more than 10%. I think that's the key here. How is your body feeling? If you're a new runner, or if you're not a high mileage runner, you could easily increase your mileage by as much as 20% or more. Or if you're an experienced runner who took a break and you're trying to come back, you can maybe add 30% a week. So adding more than 10% is certainly very doable. Listen to your body. Now, if you're a high mileage runner, for example, say you run 30 miles a week, a 20% increase would be like running another 10K. That's probably a bit too much, but listen to your body. Don't get stuck on that 10% rule. It's just too simple to apply to everybody, and do what feels good to you. Now, misconception number 6 is carb load the day before the race. I used to do this trail race that the night before the race, they would offer a pasta meal. You could come and eat what pasta you wanted. But trust me, you eat a big pasta meal or a big carbohydrate meal the day before the race, the night before the race, you're going to lay in bed because your body's going to be working digestion. It's going to lay on your stomach, and you're going to wake up feeling bloated. It's going to be awful. So do not carb load the day before the race. To emphasize carbohydrates in the days leading up to the race, but don't pack it on the day before the race. You just feel terrible in the morning and you'll regret it. Now, my last misconception, number 7, is that you should stretch before you run. And when you're stretching, doing static stretching, you're trying to extend your range of motion. You're trying to push those limits. But running is not an extreme range of motion sport. It's not an activity where you're really moving your body in extreme motions, unlike, say, for example, gymnastics or dancing or martial arts. So our range of motion isn't very much when we run, so that static stretching really doesn't help you, and research kind of bears that out. Research says that stretching before a run does not reduce injuries, nor does it improve the performance of a run. Now, that doesn't say you shouldn't stretch. It just means you may not be gaining anything from that. I actually stopped static stretching. I used to do these calf stretches before a run, more for my feet. It was help control my plantar fasciitis. And one day I was going to do a trail run. It was February. It was cold, and I forgot to do them. And I was driving into my car and said, "Oh, I'll just do them when I get to the trailhead." So I did that, jumped out of my car, did those calf stretches, make sure it stretched my foot muscle. Started running, and about halfway through my run, I stepped in such a way that instant pain in the bottom of my right foot stopped me dead in my tracks. And I think I tore the plantar fascia muscle in my foot. And I was convinced that doing that static stretching in the cold right before my run kind of helped bring about that injury. So static stretching may not benefit you. You certainly are welcome to do it. It just may not benefit you very much. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned something new like I did in preparing this video. If you enjoyed it, well, I'd love it if you scroll down there and hit that like icon. And if you're new here, if you're a first timer, I'd love to have you stick around and hit the subscribe button also. Thank you so much, and happy running.